Bonjour, hi. Je m'appelle Ashley et je travaille pour le département bibliothèque et événements communautaires de la ville de Westmount. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Fireside Chats with Mitch Joel, where we sit down for an insightful and candid conversation with a special guest with close connections to the Westmount community. Our excellent host, as always, is entrepreneur, author, and media personality Mitch Joel. Strategy Magazine called him one of North America's leading visionaries. Mitch is the founder of Six Pixels Group, an advisory, investing, and content producing company that's focused on commerce and innovation. And our very special guest today is Nick Farkas, who is Senior Vice President of Booking, Concerts, and Events at evenko. Nick is plugged into the music scene in Montreal and has been booking shows for over 30 years, starting with punk and metal in the 80s. Now, among many other things, he oversees all of the evenko festivals in Montreal, including Osheaga, Il Sonic, and Heavy in Montreal. And he's on the boards of the Canadian Live Music Association and the evenko Foundation. So please join me in welcoming Westmounters Nick Farkas and Mitch Joel.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Very excited to have this conversation with some new person to me, not somebody I've known at all ever. Let me bring in Nick Farkas. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I was trying to do some quick math, Nick. How many years do you think we know each other? What would you say?
Goodness. I'd say 90, 25?
Yeah, I'd say like 89, 90 as well.
90, so we get, oh yeah.
So maybe 30 years.
Oh my God, 30 years.
And I keep saying it
crazy.
When people say like, you know, Nick, I'm like, I know Nick. And they're like, how's he doing? I'm like, the guy doesn't age. You look great.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
And
I feel like I've aged a lot in the last year, let me tell you.
And you're in a business that is meant to kill you. So it's, it's wild.
It does have that effect on a lot of people.
So I have one question I want to start off with, which is, what was your first concert?
You know what? So many people have asked me that question over the years, and I don't, you know, I kind of analyze it more in the concerts that I remember as being life-changing. You know, I remember seeing Santana at the Old Montreal Forum was one of the first concerts I can remember just being like blown away. Genesis at the Montreal Forum. But I think like the real game-changing concert for me, like my first concert that really that made me want to do what I do for a living, was seeing the Clash at the Verdun Auditorium. And I believe it was 1981, if that's possible.
Yeah, 81 sounds. I'm fascinated that you can't remember your first arena show. You can't. That's crazy to me. I know exactly. Mine was Triumph Thunder 7 tour with Helix opening. Like, I even remember the opening act. Montreal Forum. No, you got nothing from me, Farkas?
I hear you. I went through like when we finally realized that we could go to concerts at the Forum, like I guess we were like 15, 16, and we went to so many. We'd get terrible seats and we'd sit away at the back of the bowl. Yeah. But you know, there was a bunch of shows that all meshed together. I remember seeing the Kinks early on, and thinking, wow, this isn't, you know, we just went because it was a concert and we wanted to see something. We didn't really know them that much. And then, you know, all of those shows around that time. So there was a bunch of shows. And I mean, I saw a bunch of concerts before that. My mom taught violin and my dad listened to almost exclusively opera. So we went to a ton of concerts as kids, and, you know, but the first rock concerts would definitely have been the Montreal Forum.
That's wild. Here's a question I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to ask you how COVID has impacted your business. How about that? Is that fair that I'm not going to ask you about that at all?
I've talked about that so much. I would love not to talk about COVID for an hour.
We're not going to talk about COVID, and we're not going to spend an hour doing this. I am really curious about a little bit about your origin story, but I want you to sprinkle the story a little bit with, how does one get into the music business? When I talk about, you know, my first job in 1988 or 89 was interviewing Tommy Lee from Motley Crue, and it's a crazy story. And if anybody has seen the movie Almost Famous, that was literally me, kind of. but a decade after the 70s. I was more of this sort of 80s and 90s person. And it is, people love the business. They dream about the business. They fantasize about the music business. So I'm curious from your perspective, one is, how did you break into the business? And also, how does one get into the music business?
That's interesting. I think, I saw Almost Famous at Drive-In this summer, going back to COVID.
That's right.
Excellent movie. And yeah, that takes you back. I think for me, it was really a labor of love, and just kind of I was going to school. I was very into punk rock music and metal, and at that period of my life. And one of the guys I hung out with that we went to shows with was actually a promoter for the shows. So started talking to him, and I'm like, what do you do exactly? He's like, I call up these agents or these bands I want to see, try to reach them and bring them to Montreal. So he was really filling a void because a lot of the punk rock shows that we wanted to see weren't coming. So I kind of, helping him out, loading gear, doing stuff like that. And then at one point, I had some student loan money. He's like, do you want to do one of these together? And I was like, sure, let's go for it. And never in a million years thought it would lead to a career. It was just really a labor of love. We wanted to see the bands that we wanted to see, and they weren't coming. No one was bringing them. Donald K. Donald at the time was not going to be booking Dag Nasty or the kind of stuff we were into. So it was kind of fortuitous. And then, I was a bike messenger. I was studying urban planning at Concordia. And none of it, this was just fun. And most of the time we just lost money. So it was never really, it never occurred to me that it would ever be a job or lead to any kind of profession. But it was something to do, and it was interesting. So gradually, finished school. He left town under questionable circumstances. And, one of my buddies, Padgett Williams, who I still work with to this day,
love Pat,
came back, and he was doing, he was still moving gear and doing stuff like that. And he's like, well, you want to promote some shows? And I was like, I was looking, actually, I was managing a bike store, I think, at the time. And I thought, that's interesting. And he was persistent. So we ended up starting out and doing, we did the Whalers, and we did the Bad Brains, and we did and we just got back into it, and it was fun. And once again, we lost, most of the time we lost money. We'd make money, lose money, make money, lose money. And we were having fun doing it. And, I'm like, okay, I can do this for a while. It's kind of fun, and we'll keep at it. Once again, even at that point, I never thought we'd make a career of it. Padge was a lot more, I think he knew early on that that's what he wanted to do with his life. Yeah. But me, I was like, this is not, this is just too risky. So I think, for me, then, started my own company together. We moved on, and we realized that we could actually make a living at it, sort of. Ran the company on my credit cards, and day to day paying the Montreal Mirror and the hour bills, a week at a time, $100 here and there, just trying to keep the lights on. And eventually, what we were doing, and we were doing a lot of volume of shows, and we, Dan Webster, who was our partner as well in the early days, who I still work with.
He was also a Westmounter, a good Westmounter also.
Also a Westmounter.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyways, he was working at Donald K. Donald, and he wanted to move on to something else. And Donald called me and said, "Kid, you want to work for me?" I'm like, I don't know. Then he just had his hip replaced. I went out to his house on the West Island. His wife, Annie, made me lunch, and we sat in the basement, and he talked to me about, what I could do and how I could still do what I wanted to do, and on a bigger scale. And, that led to the career that I've had. Thank you, Donald. Yeah. But I think, in terms of the twofold question, it's, I think a lot of kids, and I've spoken to, tons of people over the years, and I think the real opportunity in the music business and the entertainment business in general is finding your niche, being persevering. It's like we were moving gear around. We were, doing the door. We were putting up posters. We were, flyering, whatever it took to get our foot in the door. We were doing that. And I think, common misconception, I think, in our industry is it's glamorous, and it's sometimes glamorous, but mostly it's not. And you really have to be passionate about music or film or whatever side of the entertainment business that you're interested in, because you're going to work crazy hours. You're not going to make a lot of money. You're not going to meet Madonna. You're going to be doing grunt work, and you're going to try to figure out your way forward. But it's all about perseverance. It's contacts. It's trying to get doors open, trying to meet the right people. And, education is important, I guess. I got a degree. I think it helped me in the long term. Yeah. But I think it's like, the most important part is that that you're doing it for the right reason, and the right reason is passion. And if you're passionate about it, you're not going to mind working 20 hours at a time, and you're not going to mind, thinking about this job all the time, and that's going to be what you do. And I think that would be my recommendation to anyone and find your niche. We had punk rock and metal, and I remember going to South by Southwest in like 93, maybe. I'm really dating ourselves today, Mitch.
I know, it's great.
And seeing Seth Hurwitz, who is the legendary owner of the 930 Club in DC, which is, that's a legendary club, and seeing a panel with him, and some kid asked him, I don't know how many times I told the story, but some kid gets up and is like, I forget what market, I think it was Colorado. I think he was in, anyways. He's like, I there's so many promoters in my town, and I can't get my foot in the door, and I really want to be a concert promoter. What do I do? And he said, you got to find your niche. You got to find your niche, find what no one else is doing well, put your wedge in there, pry it open a little bit, do that well, get the confidence of agents, get the confidence of managers, and then that'll lead to other things. And that is exactly what we did. We started with punk rock and indie rock and grunge and metal, and then gradually open that wedge until we were doing everything we wanted to do.
Yeah. It's an amazing story too, because it's not just that Donald K. Donald DKD takes you on. It goes from Donald K. Donald into Universal Concerts. It goes into House of Blues. It goes into Gillette. And now it's evenko. Most people, individuals, can't make it all the way through. I mean, you're running through this crazy course. You're there. A lot of the people we talk about, a lot of the people we know don't make it when it's acquired, when it changes hands. When you think about your own career and a little bit of reflection, what do you think makes it so important for you? Because you're still there and you're still active and you're still so passionate about it. What made it possible for you to survive all of those rounds, putting aside the craziness of the business and trying to get gigs that sell and make money?
Wow, good question. I think, my longevity is because I still love what I do. I'm just incredibly passionate about music, and I've managed to surround myself with really a brilliant team of over the years, just incredible individuals who've gone on. Some of them have left and gone on to do great things in other cities. But I've got, Daniel Glick, who's been my right-hand man for, he started with us when he was 17. So he's been there for like almost 20 years. And, I think my longevity has been that I've been able to, I realized early on that I loved what I did, but I also loved watching other people do what I do and learning how to do it well. So I think, one of the reasons I'm probably still there is that I have been able to build a team that has incentivized to work and do what they want to do. And I give them every opportunity. I'm fortunate to work for a company that's allowed me the opportunity to do crazy, incredible concerts and take stupid risks that most normal people would never allow. I've had some great bosses, starting with Donald, and then Paulo, who went on to manage Celine, and Jacques Aubé, who was my boss up until very recently. Some great mentors. And I think, when you look at everything I've learned from all of those guys, all of those great bosses that I've had over the years, they were all incredibly different. They all had different management styles. They all had a lot to offer. And what I really learned, and it's so cliched, is teamwork. And if you've got a great team and you've got the ability to continue to thrive and enjoy what you do, then you're going to keep putting in the hours, and you're going to keep putting in the effort to be indispensable to a company. Hopefully, eventually I'm sure they will dispense of me, but I'm hoping that won't come. I'm hoping I decide
Right.
my exit strategy. But it's tumultuous. Many, people have come and gone in my industry, in our industry, and it's a testament to the great company that we work for, that they reward loyalty, and they encourage us to be creative and think outside the box and do all kinds of fun, fun things.
One of the more creative things that people may not know is you, but people who follow the industry do know. We have this amazing scene that's developed here in Montreal around these events: Osheaga, Il Sonique, Lasso, the New Country One, Heavy Montreal, of course, it's my domain. That comes from you. It comes from you having ideas and doing these things. Osheaga in particular has become a globally recognized event. One of my favorite stories of you, Nick, which I don't even know if we've talked about this because it was somewhat recent. A couple years back, I was asked to come and speak at Canadian Music Week in Toronto. I don't know if you remember this, but I think my keynote lined up with some awards, and I'm standing there just chatting with you, and we were catching up, and it was bizarre for me to be back in the music industry, but doing what I do now. And you were just clearing up at these awards. You're winning all these awards, and I was just standing at the side of the stage. I was so proud. And I was also really reflecting on how it is people like you that have made not just the music scene happen, that we can buy tickets and go to these great shows, but you've created these experiences for us to go to. Can you talk a bit about how an idea like Osheaga comes together, what that looks like, and how you keep one-upping it? Because it goes from your M&Ms now to your Foo Fighters to the who's who of what we all want to see.
I think, Osheaga specifically was, it was something that came out of necessity, in the sense that there was a lot of stuff that was coming through touring packages from mostly Canada, Edgefest, Somersault. These were big touring packages that went out, but didn't really resonate with the Montreal market so much. So they were artists that would do really well in Ontario, out west, and then they get here and it would kind of fall flat. So we had this idea that we would build a very Montreal centric event. And Dan Webster, everybody that I was working with at the time, and it was very the idea, we were looking more at the European festival model, at what was happening in Europe, and trying to, about the experience, and not just, coming a stage and a couple of portalets and some hot dogs. And
the other thing about Europe that we should mention for people who don't know the business is, when you see those festivals, to somebody who is in North America prior to experiencing an Osheaga, you're like, how do those bands play together on stage? It's also this incredible diversity of music that is bizarre to anybody who thinks you're going to pay a ticket and go see Madonna and Slayer at the same event. It seems bizarre, but that is what they were doing there. And that's also very reflective of how you were thinking about it from Montreal, which is a very interesting thought.
Well, it was interesting the way they did things, and we knew we couldn't do things the way they did them in Europe because they just wouldn't work. So we had to kind of come up, and I think that's what makes Osheaga unique and interesting, is that it is Montreal centric, and we wanted it to be like a microcosm of Montreal. We wanted to take Montreal, put it on the island, the food, the music, art, culture, just trying to really take create this kind of little Montreal on the island. And we really felt from the beginning, Parc Jean Drapeau was one of the most magical sites, I've ever seen a concert at. So we had this great canvas, we had a great city. I always, nothing against Bonnaroo, but it's in Tennessee. It's this big festival in Tennessee, and it's in the middle of nowhere. You have to drive from like an hour from either airport to get to this place. And I'm like, well, we have Montreal, and we're 10 minutes away by metro. So, we have this huge advantage in that we've got this fantastic city and this fantastic site. Now we just have to program something and do something that's going to be compelling. So we were, fortunate enough to be given that kind of canvas where we could create what at the time was basically an indie rock festival. I'd learned from, speaking with Andre Menard, who was, he was founder of the Montreal Jazz Festival. Talked to Andre a ton as I was growing up in the business, and he was always, incredibly insightful man and a real visionary. And he would say, he's like, the jazz festival, it drives me crazy. People get mad, and there's like, what you're doing isn't jazz, because as the festival evolved over 40 years, he added in other elements, and he's like, he felt like he had stayed pure, but the jazz purists were always saying, this isn't pure jazz, and you're bastardizing the brand or whatever. And so I remember that from the start, and I'm like, we're going to do Osheaga, but we're going to do it, we're going to have hip hop, we're going to have reggae, we're going to have indie rock, we're going to have everything that at the time made sense You know, I remember we had Sonic Youth and Jack and Ben Harper to start. And I'm like, everything falls between Sonic Youth and Ben Harper. No one can ever come to us and say,
Yeah.
that doesn't fit Osheaga, you know? So we really started with that kind of huge canvas of opportunity. And then the founding principle was, you know, I'd been to so many events and so many concerts as you had and festivals, and the experience was not always up to, let's call it, the experience wasn't always good.
No,
so
like
the bands were good.
Yeah, the joke
Sound
was always
terrible, or
yeah.
there's so many things, you know, 3 portalettes for 5,000 people, whatever it was. So we were like, we are going to make our festival is going to be based on the fan experience and the band experience. We wanted the band experience to be, you know, next to none. And that was the founding principles. And we've always, you know, with all of our festivals, we've always stuck to that. Fan experience, band experience are key, and everything else will fall into place.
It's been really interesting to watch the evolution of it, because to me now, when you buy a ticket to a concert, there's VIP experiences, there's all these other layers to it. And I do feel that there was an evolution in that time when Osheaga was created, and this all became more accessible, because you're right. I didn't mean to interrupt you before, but to me, going to a festival was basically standing in the middle of a very dirty field, listening to music not on a great sound system. And I'm like, this isn't pleasurable for me. And then coming back to it, and even things like Heavy Montreal or going to Osheaga, you feel like you're part, and it's a cheesy word, but it's true. It felt very community-like. I mean, you really was a community. It's an incredible experience when I think about it.
You know, my musical taste is so varied, and you know, like I mentioned earlier, my dad from a classical background to you know, punk rock, metal, reggae, ska growing up, and everything in between. And you know, the sense of community to me is such an important thing. You know, when I go to Heavy, like I have the massive smile on my face when I'm doing 77, you know, it's like, I'm home, I'm with my family. Like I feel, and I'm looking at all these faces, and everybody is like, you know, this is an opportunity for a bunch of like-minded people to get together and listen to music. What could be better? But then I remember doing El Sonic for the first time, you know, and I've done a lot of electronic music over the years. And I came back from my vacation in Cape Cod, like I did Heavy Osheaga, went for like 4 or 5 days, flew home, did El Sonic, and it was pouring rain. It was cold. It was like 7 degrees in August, like a total freak, abnormal day. And I get there, and I'm early plane out of Boston, and I get to the site, and I took, you know, I'm going to do it like a true fan. And I took the metro there, and I'm like on the metro, and the sense of excitement of these kids, that was the first year. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. And just that feeling once again of community, that once I got on site, I was like, this is totally amazing. These people are so stoked. They're having such a good time. And it's so contagious that regardless of the music, regardless of the style, for me, it's just intoxicating. Like I get there, watching the kids run when the doors open at Osheaga, watching the kids run to the stages is just, it's such a great feeling. And I think, you know, been tremendously fortunate to have to work with people that allowed us. You know, Heavy's been a battle of like a long-term battle of trying to make it financially viable.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
And I think for us, what Osheaga brought was an opportunity. The first time we did Heavy, we did it in June or July, and then we did Osheaga in September, and they were both underwhelming in terms of financial outcome. And I had an epiphany. I was standing behind the stage, and I remember it clearly. And I looked at Daniel, and I was like, we can't do a country festival, but we can do a metal festival. And no, this was the second year, sorry. And it was the first year of Heavy. Sorry, the first year of Heavy was the third year of Osheaga, I think, or fourth year of Osheaga. And I'm like, and we were so stupid. We didn't do them back to back. We did them 2 months apart. And I'm like, if we do these back to back, then we can share the infrastructure.
Right.
Because you're really building a small city, right? So I'm like, okay, we'll build the city once and we'll leave it up for both festivals. And that kind of led to this model where, you know, we can go from 77 into Heavy, into Osheaga, into Sonic, into Lasso. And Lasso, coincidentally, 15 years later, we had the idea. I'm like, well, maybe now we can do a country festival. 15 years ago, there was no chance that we could do a country festival in Montreal. It would not have worked.
It's amazing.
But now with streaming and music consumption has changed, exponentially, as you know. So it gave us an opportunity to try something completely crazy and different. And country music, honestly, I was, same thing with Ilsonic when we got back into it. I was like, I had to surround myself with people, that knew the genre better than I did. And I immersed myself in it, and I listened to it, and I got familiar with the artists, and it was fun. And I was like, I'm learning something new. I'm learning about country music, and it's been it's so unfortunate that we didn't get to do it last year. The team was so excited about it. Everybody was really, the reaction from the minute we launched was just amazing. So I was so excited to do that festival and see how it would come off. And it was incredibly disappointing, but just working, every kind of music is different, and the artists, agents, managers are different depending on what their genres are. But country music for me has been an eye-opening experience because of the artists are willing to record blurbs for your festival.
Videos.
They're willing to do, you ask them to do something and they do it. They don't just ignore your request. And it's just like such a refreshing. They're so nice. Everybody is so nice. I'm not saying everybody in rock and roll isn't nice, but everyone in country is so much nicer.
So the last area that I'm curious about before we wrap up is, you mentioned earlier, you don't get to meet Madonna, which is true and it's not true. I mean, the truth is, being a part of the business when now I do my bass podcast, so I guess I still do see artists like that. It is interesting to be around people who are so creative, so appreciated, and so loved, which is one thing. But the part that I find the best is, and I'll use an example that we both know and love, which is Chuck Como, who is the drummer in Simple Plan. You and I met Chuck when he was this skateboard punk kid, and he wanted to be in my magazines, and he wanted to be on shows, and stuff happens where they create this band Simple Plan that goes on to be incredibly successful still to this day, very charitable, very engaged. I know for me, it's the stuff that makes me happiest when there are people that I knew before anybody knew them, and they became this thing that I saw in those early days. I was like, it's got to happen. These people are so creative and so interesting. What's that like for you? Because you've been a part of so many artists, individual solo and band successes. You give people breaks because they come on those stages. There's a lot of appreciation and love for you. I know that for sure. But can you talk a bit about what it means when you see people who are just starting out become these international massive sensations?
It's amazing. I mean, it's like watching the team that I work with, have amazing ideas about what artists to put on, and just finding themselves and finding their creative, Evelyn Cote, who does Ilsonic, she worked at EC. She was a journalist who had a tremendous musical knowledge, and we brought her in, and, we had to, it goes back to the same thing I was saying before. We had this space that we needed filled, which was we needed somebody who knew more about electronic music. So she immersed herself in it. So watching the people around me become really great at their jobs is awesome. Watching bands and artists, I mean, it's the same kind of feeling. I remember the first time I saw Chuck and the band play, they were in a band called
Reset. Was it
Roach.
Reset? Or Roach. Right.
They were called Roach. And they played, I think, 2 or 3 shows as Roach. And they were opening, we had them 4th on a show at the Spectrum. And
I was there. I remember.
I got to the show, and I'm standing at the back bar, and like usually the first band on, you're not really that into checking out that much, but I'd heard from a bunch of people that they were really good and that they were kids. So I just remember watching them at 14 years old. I guess Chuck was 14, Pierre's probably, they were 14, 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, that kid can actually sing, and they could play. And I'm like, and they wrote catchy songs. And, I think we started managing them when they were like 15, 16 years old, and watching, I took them to LA. I took Pierre and Chuck to LA to mix their record with an old buddy of mine from the punk rock scene in Montreal, Steve Kravac, and back in the day. And I took them to LA, and they were underage. They couldn't even We
It's
couldn't do
crazy.
anything except be in the studio. So I was in the studio with these guys for 10 days. We're staying in a crappy little hotel, like just motor lodge, continental breakfast, which consisted of old donuts and like coffee. And they were ecstatic. They were in LA. You know, they were
Greatest.
where their heroes came from. And I'm hanging out with these kids. And to this day, like I have the fondest memories of that experience and watching those guys grow from being, kids that were just loved punk rock to being, like you said, their causes and everything, that the Simple Plan Foundation. It's good. I mean, I see Chuck and I see those guys and I have
Yeah.
to smile and I feel proud to have had any part in what happened. Is, they've had great managers, Rob and,
And Eric, yeah,
there's the
coalition,
team.
yeah.
Yeah, they've surrounded themselves with great people and they're just great people. And watching all these bands throughout the years go from, it's just an amazing feeling to feel like we had some contribution to get someone on a stage where they could be seen by other people, and then their careers take off from there. It's awesome. It's better, like you said, than it's better than meeting stars that are actually stars.
You know what?
It's
I think
watching the
it's
progression.
I think it's better than my own personal success. Like just being in that orbit for me makes me like, it's funny. We're talking about Simple Plan. I was doing a speech somewhere in Europe and I had a layover in Germany to come back to Montreal, and the guys were there and it was like, Mitch, oh guys. And we're hanging out and they're there on tour. I'm coming back from speaking and just, I'm sitting there smiling like they're touring the world. This is the craziest thing to me. And for me, that makes me happier than even my own, like just knowing that these other people really did it because you see these things and you believe in them. And it's very hard for these ideas to manifest themselves in the world. It's a very tough, creative world, and they do. And you just feel like this is crazy to see.
I love seeing the success of Canadian artists and, Quebec artists, Montreal artists in particular, but, seeing the way Canada punches above its weight and like so many,
Yeah.
so many amazing artists coming out of this country. And, I remember early on in the business, it's like Canadian content and, maybe the bands weren't, they didn't get the recognition that they would have gotten being American bands, but to be able to break through, the Weekend is playing the Super Bowl, for God's sake. It's like, it's the renaissance of like Canadian music internationally. Watching these bands go from playing, I remember the first time we did the Weekend at Osheaga and he played, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm like, wow, there's something to this. And, next thing you know, he's headlining and he's selling out stadium arenas around the world. It's an amazing progression. And I think it says a lot about the culture that we have in Canada and the support of the arts in the province of Quebec and the province of Ontario federally. It gives people, it's incredibly difficult to make it, as you know, and it's incredibly, it's like sports, there's a lot of people trying to do it, and it's hard to be that one that succeeds. But I'm proud to live in a country where, culture and where these things are funded and where, it makes such a huge difference to management companies, agents, to have, the ability to have a government funding that helps them develop and discover these artists, to record labels, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great system. And I think people sometimes overlook how fortunate we are to have that in place.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I gotta thank you, because when I started off in journalism, I then decided to publish magazines, and it was a stupid, crazy idea. And your office was one of my first stops. Your office was one of my first stops to see if you guys would support and put some ads in. And you and Dan and Nancy and Paj did not miss a beat. And I don't know what trajectories people take, but I remember those meetings. I remember when I came back to the business and started a record label with my buddy in Toronto, and we'd signed this band called Alexis on Fire, which is now Dallas Green and City and Color. And I brought that Alexis on Fire demo into Greenland, and you guys were all, let's make this happen. Let's do something with it. So, I also owe you a debt of thanks, because it's been an incredible journey for me, but just being able to check out shows and know you this long is such a treat, man.
It's such a real interesting thing when you think of how much has come out of this province and how creative, like Vice magazine, the whole Vice media empire, those guys would hang out in the office too. The office was really, for us, it was like a place where, people would just come and pitch. We had no money, so they weren't pitching us ideas on selling anything. But it's like, can you take out an ad? I remember taking out an ad in the first Vice too, and it was called Voice at the time. And I did the ad on an Excel spreadsheet because I didn't know how to use anything else on the computer. So it was like a black square, white square, black square, white square. And seeing those guys 20 years later at the Vice 20th anniversary thing, and I'm like, you remember that crappy ad? They're like, of course, man. You were, we were all part of a community, part of a scene, a scene that was, that's what attracted me to punk rock and everything that I do. Is that ethic of you're part of a scene, part of a community, and you give back to your community, you give back to your scene, and everybody supports each other and helps each other on the way up, and hopefully benefets from it.
And what's amazing
I'm
is
glad we were there.
Yeah,
like, I'm glad, and I love running into you in airports and things where the hell are you going now? What are you doing?
Where are you going?
Your career has been insane.
It's been fun, and it comes full circle back to this community, because then we become family people, and we have kids, and we're hanging out at the arena all the time and seeing each other.
Or at swimming classes,
And there's another whole community there. So before I let you go, Nick, I was thinking that the first question was, what was your first concert? So let's end on, what was your last concert that you were able to see? Because we're going to have concerts again soon. But what was the last concert that you did actually see?
It was the Lumineers, I think was the last concert.
Okay.
At the Bell Center. And then that, like, if I'd known, I probably would have gone to a ton of concerts that week.
Right. But that's the message.
And you know what? Eventually I'm going to figure out what my first concert was. I'll talk to my buddies. Like, I've got one of my buddies who still lives in Florida who was at all those early shows. I'm sure he had a book, remember everything. It's kind of embarrassing to be in this business and not know that. You put me on the spot here.
No, it's good. The good news is that concerts are going to be back. And I think what you just said is exactly true. There's going to be a massive pent-up demand. We saw so many artists pass during COVID, not because of COVID, but pass. For me, Eddie Van Halen was a big one. And I know that my attitude now going forward is not going to be, I'm going to check them out next time. I'm going to go, I'm going to be their front row. I'm going to be high-fiving you at the bar. It's going to be like old times again once we get back there.
I can't wait. I cannot honestly wait to be just watching a live event again. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah,
looking forward to it.
And I have a special treat. I had my rock star lighting here for you to see.
Nice. That goes really well with your walls there, the wood and mahogany.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I thought I'd share that with you.
Nice setup.
Hey, Nick, thank you so much. Best of luck. And to everybody watching, I'm going to pass it back to Ashley. But before I do, don't give up on seeing live shows. They will be back. And when they are, Nick's probably the person putting them on. Go see them.
They'll be safe, and we'll be taking care of you. So come back. We'll be there. We just need people to come back.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Cool, man. Good, great seeing you. Talk soon.
Thank you so much, Nick, for taking the time to sit down with us today. And thank you, Mitch, for being such an excellent host as always. I think we need some of your rock and roll lighting at Victoria Hall when we start to do live concerts again. It was a pleasure listening in on your chat. To everyone watching at home, if you'd like to learn more about the Library and Community Events Department's upcoming programming, you can always visit our website at westlib.org and sign up for our email newsletter. Vous pouvez également visiter le site web de la ville de Westmount au westmount.org. Thanks for watching. Merci.